This episode of Trifles is brought to you by listeners like you, who choose to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/trifles to learn more.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the band was speckled and there were 6 Napoleons, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about why Dr. Watson was called James by his wife? Or of Sherlock Holmes' dining habits? Or what happened when he let a criminal escape?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 426, The Field Bazaar. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you... I don't even know.
I don't either.
Are you having a field bazaar today?
I'm having a field day today.
That's bizarre.
That is bizarre.
What's your favorite activity at the field day?
Oh, field day. We're going out into the field with my scythe, and trimming the grass a little bit, and then making a putting green, and then playing clock golf. Do you ever play clock golf?
I don't have the time.
Yeah, well. You have to set an alarm and get up early to play clock golf.
Well,
Clock golf, do you know? Clock golf was a lawn game, that was popular in the Victorian, I think, and the Edwardian age. And what you did was you went out to the lawn and put a hole where you would want to sink your golf ball, and then arranged numbers in a circle around the hole with a far distance away from the hole, and passed out putters and golf balls, and you and your pals would play a round of golf attempting to putt from the number into the hole. And that was clock golf.
I see. Kind of like a horse in basketball. Some kind of similar round-the-world type things where you're changing locations to make it into a target. Interesting. Yeah. Well, we are here to talk neither about clock golf nor field day. This is the first in a series of episodes that we're kicking off in Season 9 here about the Apocrypha of Sherlock Holmes. Everyone knows there were 56 short stories and 4 novels that Conan Doyle wrote, and there were others that happened to pop up along the way or later on or were discovered that are part of what's known as the Apocrypha. They are ex-canonical, shall we say. And we thought we would educate you on what each of them are, maybe a bit about their history, their discovery, their context, etc., and make this into a multi-part series. So tuck in for what is ahead. We do have a drawing at the end of this episode. All of our paying subscribers are automatically entered into this drawing. One name will be chosen at random to receive a back issue of the Baker Street Journal. You can join us as a paid subscriber either on Substack or on Patreon. We have links to both in the show notes, so check it out and see what makes sense for you. Any level of support is certainly welcome and appreciated, and it makes it possible for us to do the research and to host the podcast on various platforms and do everything we do to bring you this quality programming. Well, apocryphally yours, Burt. Why is the Apocrypha worth talking about?
Well, that's a good question. Why is the Apocrypha worth talking about? Now, on clock golf, what you do is, the Apocrypha are worth talking about because they are sort of ripples in the rock of Sherlock Holmes in the pond. You know, Conan Doyle's character, the Sherlock Holmes cases were so popular for so many years that there are things that sort of vibrate off of them. And some of these, like the Field Bazaar, are things Conan Doyle actually did, that if you wanted to add them to the 60 so-called recorded cases of Sherlock Holmes, you'd have to increase the number. So if you want to count the Field Bazaar, you're up to 61. But they're indicative
and that ruins that nice round number of 60 that we have.
It does. But they're indicative of the popularity of the character. And this one, the Field Bazaar, is particularly interesting because it was published in 1896. Now, Holmes is supposed to be dead at Reichenbach in 1896. And what happens is that Conan Doyle's university...
Not 96. He was dead from 91 to 94.
Oh, that's right. But it was written at a time when Conan Doyle said that he would never bring the character back.
Conan Doyle was on hiatus from Sherlock Holmes, right.
What do you say to an atus?
Hiatus.
Hiatus. But, so from Conan Doyle's standpoint, Holmes is not coming back anytime soon, if ever. But here he is. He's asked to contribute to a souvenir edition of The Student, which is Edinburgh University's undergraduate magazine. And he graduated from Edinburgh University. And he didn't have fond feelings about Edinburgh University, but he agreed to do this, to have a contribution, because this is a fundraiser for a new sport pavilion. And so it's a special publication. And other people like James Barrie, who also went to Edinburgh University and who was the author of Peter Pan and many other things, and Walter Besant and Israel Zangwill and so on, were all part of this fundraising effort for this new sporting pavilion. So Conan Doyle agrees to contribute something about Sherlock Holmes, and this is it.
And it is short enough that we could almost read it in this episode. I don't know that we necessarily want to read the entire thing, but we can give a good sense as to what's going on between these two characters. And it opens in kind of a classic way. One of these instances where Holmes is doing his mind-reading trick, that we saw in the beginning of The Cardboard Box and The Resident Patient. And it opens very abruptly. "I should certainly do it," said Sherlock Holmes. And, Watson was startled at this. He's saying his companion had been eating his breakfast with his attention entirely centered upon the paper, which was propped up by the coffee pot. And right there, what a wonderful, homey, kind of relatable scenario. You can picture yourself at the breakfast table with something that you're reading propped up in front of you. It just, again, makes the Holmes and Watson characters come alive in terms of the reality of their situations.
Oh, it really, really does. That's a great point. And particularly the coffee pot, because we will hear about the coffee pot again in The Hound of the Baskervilles. Holmes says, "I have in front of me a well-polished, silver-plated coffee pot." And he's seen in the reflection Watson looking at Mortimer's stick. And so he's again done his little mind-reading trick when he, apropos of nothing, with his back to Watson, he says, "Well, Watson, what do you make of it?" And Watson turns around, stunned. He says, "Holmes, you must have eyes in the back of your head." Well, this is another one of these, as you say, homey little situations. It's a great way to get you into the case.
Indeed. And one of the, we're looking at the Sherlock Holmes reference library version of the Apocrypha. And one of the footnotes here that Les Klinger provides, he discusses the breakfast habits of Holmes and Watson. And he says that they're mysterious. In A Study in Scarlet, Watson refers to his own late habits and confesses that he gets up at all sorts of ungodly hours. Holmes generally had breakfast and left his apartment before Watson rose. And this was presumably before Watson went back into practice as a practicing physician. But in The Speckled Band, Watson describes himself as regular in his habits, and Holmes was a late riser as a rule. So they've kind of swapped roles there. And, of course, in the beginning of The Engineer's Thumb, Watson expects to discover Holmes taking his breakfast shortly after 7 o'clock. So we're all over the place in terms of breakfast habits.
Well, it's true. And what happens here at breakfast is now, of course, Holmes has startled Watson by saying, I should certainly do it. And so Watson has nothing to do in terms of response by saying, do what? Which is probably something you never want to say to Sherlock Holmes, because he will, of course, have an answer. He's filling his pipe and he says, that's a most characteristic question of yours, Watson. And here Holmes says something really remarkable in this. Now, we should point out that the word apocryphal usually refers to something of doubtful authenticity. And here, there's no question about the authenticity. This is actually written by Conan Doyle. But it's apocryphal in the sense that it's not one of the really recorded canonical cases. But even so, Holmes now says something really remarkable. He says, that's very characteristic of you, Watson. You will not, I am sure, be offended if I say that any reputation for sharpness which I may possess has been entirely gained by the admirable foil which you have made for me. Have I not heard of debutantes who've insisted upon plainness in their chaperones? There's a certain analogy, Holmes says. Now that is just remarkable.
Oh, that's kind of like Rodney Dangerfield's recommendation in Back to School. If you want to look thin, hang out with fat people.
Right.
Which is entirely appropriate because Watson says, I may be very obtuse, but I confess I'm unable to see how you've managed to know that I was asked to help in the Edinburgh University Bazaar.
Yeah, now Watson, we should point out, Holmes has just said, you won't be offended. But Watson is offended. Watson says, we were on intimate, easy terms, and all of this can be said without much offense. And yet I acknowledged that I was nettled at his remark. I mean, nobody really appreciates that sort of remark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Watson then says, well, you're exactly right, of course, Holmes. The letter's only just come to hand, and I've not spoken to you since. And then Holmes says...
Holmes said, well, in spite of that, and this is where we get that classic pose, Holmes leaned back into his chair, put his fingertips together. I would even venture to suggest that the object of the bazaar is to enlarge the university cricket field. Now, we should just pause here for the footnote about the bazaar. Les notes that bazaars are originally Turkish or Indian marketplaces where a large variety of goods were sold. The English adopted the bazaar as a vehicle for charitable fundraising. So it is, let's see, a bazaar is the clergyman's recognized ultimate hope when he wants to enlarge his school. And
yeah, it's like a fete, a village fete. Yeah. I mean, you have a lot of people gathering together with tables. They're usually, selling muffins and scones and food and all sorts of things. It's a charity event, basically.
Yeah. And George Augustus Sala, in his amusing London Up to Date in 1896, tells of Monty Piffle, a gentleman of no income, frequently called upon to assist charities with fundraising. And his last and most brilliant achievement in this direction had been the Grand Chinese Festival and Feast of Lanterns Bazaar for the benefit of that beneficent institution, the Hospital for Sick Monkeys, in Gorilla Street, Marmoset Road, Northwest.
I just sent them a check.
They don't monkey around.
They don't. Well, and then, in this dialogue, between the two of them, Holmes and Watson, now we have more really remarkable commentary from Holmes. He says, Watson, you are an excellent subject. You are never blasé. You respond instantly to any external stimulus. Your mental processes may be slow, but they are never obscure, and I found during breakfast that you were easier reading than the leader in the Times in front of me. Now, I think Holmes really has crossed the line. I mean, he said Watson is slow.
Yeah.
And if I were Watson, I would be pretty annoyed at this point.
Well, he's more curious than angry. He says, I should be glad to know how you arrived at your conclusions. And here Holmes gives us his explanation and notes, once again, that giving away his process compromises his reputation. He said, the train of reasoning is based on such obvious facts that no credit can be claimed for it. You entered the room with a thoughtful expression, a man who's debating some point in his mind. In your hand, you held a solitary letter. Now, last night, you retired in the best of spirits. So it's clear that it was this letter in your hand that had caused the change in you. It tells him that's obvious. Well, it's all obvious when it's explained to you, Watson. I naturally asked myself what the letter could contain, which might have this effect on you. As you walked, you held the flap side of the envelope toward me, and I saw the same shield-shaped device which I have observed upon your old college cricket cap. It was clear it came from Edinburgh University, or some club connected with the university. So there you have it.
Well, and then he says, when you reached the table, you'd laid down the letter beside your plate with the address uppermost, and you walked over to look at the framed photograph upon the left of the mantelpiece. Well, Watson is amazed. It amazed me to see the accuracy with which he had observed my movements. What next? And here, you can see some of the richness that's actually in this little piece here. Well, Holmes says, I began by glancing at the address, and I could tell even at the distance of 6 feet that it was an unofficial communication. This I gathered from the use of the word doctor upon the address, to which, as a bachelor of medicine, you have no legal claim. Wait a minute.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Well, now, that's not really so, because Holmes is contradicting what we first hear from Watson in Study in Scarlet, when he says, in 1878, he obtained a degree of Doctor of Medicine. In order to receive his M.D., Watson would have had to acquire membership in the Royal College of Surgeons and a license from the Royal College of Physicians, according, to references that folks have looked up. And that was those kinds of qualifications were essential for Watson to open up his own medical practice. So that's quite a remarkable statement. But anyway, here Holmes has now identified Watson as an attendee, as an alumna of the University of Edinburgh.
Perfect. So Holmes says that when the letter was turned over, he could see that the enclosure was a printed one. The idea of a bazaar first occurred to me. I already weighed the possibility of it being a political communication, but this seemed improbable in the present stagnant conditions of politics. Now, perhaps it's worth pausing here and trying to understand what the then present conditions of politics were. Holmes calls them stagnant, and his note less says that pregnant might have been more accurate. In 1896, war in South Africa was imminent. The abortive Jameson raid into the Transvaal occurred in 1895 after Jameson surrendered in early 1896. Kaiser Wilhelm sent a sympathetic telegram to the president of the Transvaal, causing the long alienation from England. And Cecil Rhodes resigned from his premiership in Rhodesia, and the Transvaal and Orange Free State entered into a military alliance. So that would then lead to what became known as the Boer War.
Well, and also in 1895, Salisbury was prime minister for the third and last time, and the government had fallen, and there was a lot of resentment and protest from different classes for demands for better conditions and calls for social reforms and improved political representation. So it was a real brouhaha.
Mm.
But then back in the case, Holmes goes on and he says, I turned my attention then to the photograph that you'd looked at, and I saw it once. Now, theoretically, it was on the mantelpiece, so Holmes wouldn't have needed to see it, this anew, because clearly it supposedly had been there for a while. But he notes that it is the Edinburgh University 11. It's the university cricket team with the pavilion and the cricket field in the background.
My small experience of cricket clubs, says Holmes, I wonder how small it was, actually, very small, has taught me that next to churches and cavalry ensigns, they are the most debt-laden things upon the earth. So when I saw you return to the table and take out your pencil and draw lines upon the envelope, I was convinced that you were endeavoring to realize some projected improvement, which was to be brought about by a bazaar. Your face still showed some indecision, so I was able to break in upon you with my advice that you should assist in so good an object. And we should note here, again, cricket. Holmes noted the insignia, that shield-shaped device that he observed on Watson's old college cricket cap. Les tells us that Watson's interest in cricket doesn't appear anywhere else in the canon, although wickets are mentioned in the Naval Treaty as play toys of Watson's use. The only record of Watson's sporting life is Bob Ferguson's recollection of Watson's career as a rugby player for Blackheath and the Sussex Vampire. So interesting that Conan Doyle would choose cricket at this juncture. Makes you believe that there might very well be a need for cricket field improvements at Edinburgh University.
Incredible. Well, Watson then says exactly what one should never say to Sherlock Holmes. Well, of course, it was as easy as possible, said I. My remark appeared to nettle him. And then Holmes says, I may add that the particular help which you've been asked to give was that you should write in their album, and that you've already made up your mind that the present incident will be the subject of your article. Well, but now, Watson is how? He's amazed.
Oh, it's as easy as possible. And I leave its solution to your own ingenuity. In the meantime, you will excuse me if I return to this very interesting article upon the trees of Cremona and the exact reasons for the preeminence of the manufacture of violins. It's one of those small outlying problems to which I am sometimes tempted to direct my attention.
So here in this little case, this little adventure of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, we have this wonderful scene in Baker Street. And we also have all this new information, Watson and cricket, Watson and the University of Edinburgh, Watson and not being able to call himself Doctor of Medicine. What is all that about?
The Cremona Fiddlers?
The Cremona Fiddlers, right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, this is, like we said, the first entry in our apocryphal series. Stay tuned for more each month as we move ahead in Season 9 on Trifles. And before we let you go, we're going to make good on that promise for the drawing. All of our Patreon and Substack supporters, our paid supporters, are entered into this drawing. So let's bring out the big prize wheel and give it a spin. Goes round and round, slowing down and landing on number 6. Number 6. And that looks like it is John Guillen. John, congratulations. We'll have a back issue of the Baker Street Journal on its way to you very soon. Well, Bert, I guess that does it for this episode. Speaking of Baker Street Journal, we will be returning to the Baker Street Journal pages in the very next episode for one of our Morley Montgomery Award-winning articles. What is it? Well, it's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Would you get down the Conk Singleton forgery case, please, Watson?